Alright, guys, gals, non-binary pals, we're back again for another list, and I've made an executive decision not to do top 5 lists anymore. It's going to be a top whatever list. So welcome back to another underrated games list for the PlayStation 1 on the channel. I've done one before for the Sega Saturn, and now we're moving on to the PlayStation because it's still my wheelhouse, my 32-bit era. So thanks for tuning in, and let's check out the most underrated PlayStation games of all time. And so obviously, just like the Sega Saturn video, the stipulation here is it's my list. It's my opinion. You have your opinion. If you agree, disagree, let me know in a respectful way down below. But these lists are honestly a mixture of, my opinion and fun a little bit. So we're going to have a little fun too at the same time. It's not, not everything has to be super serious and, my opinion is the only opinion. Rawr. Rawr. So with that out of the way, let's look at the first game on my underrated PlayStation 1 games list. And it is Loaded. Loaded was released in 1995 by Gremlin Interactive. And a cool fact about Loaded too, it has a really cool name in Japan. It's called Blood Factory. Now, why they changed this name for the US, I don't know. Maybe Blood Factory was too descriptive. Because this game is very violent, and it is literally a blood factory. It's an over-the-top shooting game with a bunch of very weird characters, including, a baby, a guy in a dress. There's like this pirate guy that dual wields. That's the guy that I like to use. And the characters are designed by some famous comic creators too. Garth Ennis of Preacher fame, and Greg Staples. And really, this is a relatively early PlayStation game, but you don't hear many people talk about it. There's not a lot to it. It's very, surface level. However, when it came out, it actually kind of blew my mind a little bit with the graphics and the lighting effects. The lighting effects in the game are so good. They're one of the hallmarks of the game. And it's pretty basic. You run around, you have your gun, you have a mega weapon. You're basically collecting key cards to open, different color doors and just get through, the levels, the prison sort of levels. You're all prisoners or something in the nonsensical storyline. But I was definitely super impressed with the lighting and just the fun. Like I said, it's not very complicated. It's not a lot of stuff going on. It's a mindless, fun game. And it was super fun. I had so much fun with this back in the day. There was a sequel called Reloaded, and it eventually did come out on the Sega Saturn too. And it's definitely a very good, very fun game. It's definitely mindless. There's a lot of blood. There's a lot of weird stuff in it. So you can be prepared for that too. But the graphical effects are good. There's good transparencies. The lighting is amazing, like I said. And it gets the enemyzero seal of approval. The next game I wanted to talk about today is it's got a couple different names, but it's called Gunner's Heaven in Japan, or Rapid Reload in Europe. It only came out in Japan and Europe. It never came out in the US because of Sony's very stupid PlayStation policy. You know what I'm talking about. They had a policy for no 2D games when the PlayStation first came out. What a freaking dumb policy. That's one of the reasons I started out with the Saturn instead of the PlayStation, because I'm a huge fan of 2D graphics, 2D games. And so back to Gunner's Heaven, it was made by Media Vision, and it's a 2D run and gun, much in the style of Gunstar Heroes on the Genesis. Okay, come on now. It's not nearly as good as Gunstar Heroes. We all know that. We know that. We're friends. We understand that. However, it is pretty fun, and it's very similar to that. There's 2 different characters you can choose from, each with 4 different weapons. You couldn't combine your weapons like Gunstar Heroes or anything. There is a grappling hook ability too, which is pretty unique. It's almost like the old, Bionic Commando game. on the Nintendo, where you can, grapple the different platforms and swing around and stuff like that. And honestly, because it was never released in America, I think a lot of people probably have never even heard of this game or seen this game. So you might not consider it underrated in that sense, because maybe people don't know about it, but it's definitely a pretty fun game. The graphics for the PlayStation, the 2D slouch that the PlayStation was, are honestly pretty good. There is no 2-player in the game, which is a big mark against it, but it is very fun. There's a lot of decent sprite-based work in it. There's mini bosses, there's regular bosses. It's got a pretty unique power-up system where you actually get like these incremental P's as you run along. These P's fill your power meter, but it constantly ticks down like second to second. So it's actually kind of odd. Like you spend all your level collecting these things to power up your weapons, and it just keeps ticking down. And collecting never really seems to stay up with you shooting or running around. So, you don't stay powered up for very long. But other than those, minor sort of, gameplay things and stuff, it's a very fun adventure. And it definitely could have more people talking about it, a bigger fan base, I think. And the next game was released in 1998 by Squaresoft, in US and Japan only, and it's called Einhander. No, it's got nothing to do with Panzer Dragoon. Settle down. It's a 2.5D shooter that's completely, 3D polygon based in the background, with a very interesting story that's loosely based on Greek mythology, believe it or not. And I think when this game came out, it actually came out super popular, at least in my circles, meaning it was made by Squaresoft. In the days of the PlayStation, Squaresoft could do no wrong. Squaresoft was the #1 developer in the world. Whatever they made turned to gold. So I think when Einhander came out, it had a lot of hype behind it, but it died out pretty quick after that. And nowadays, I do think Einhander has a little bit of a fan following, but it's not major. And I think it's one of the most unique shooters of all time. I think the fan base should be bigger than it is. Its most unique aspect is actually the weapon system. You have a base gun, but there's 3 different ships in the game, and each one can basically hold a different amount of enemy weapons. So the way it works in the game is you actually blow up an enemy and they drop their weapon, and you can like fly over the weapon and pick it up and like attach it to yourself and use it. And now the weapons you pick up have limited ammunition, and there's a bunch of different ones, each do something different. There's rocket launchers, like shotgun type weapons, there's grenades, there's bombs, there's high powered rifles too. There's definitely a super good mix of different weapons, and it's a very unique weapon system, and the 3 ships can hold different amounts. The basic ship, which I use, that's for like kids, so that's my type of ship, can only pick up 1 weapon. But the other ship, maybe it can pick up 2 different weapons, and you can actually switch between them. And then the last ship can actually pick up 3 different weapons, I think. 2, 3. So you sort of choose your difficulty based on, the complexity of the ship you're taking. There's very good graphics in the game. There's very good bosses in the game. And the gameplay is super unique. And I really like the graphic style of the game too. It's definitely a cool shooter. It's a slower paced shooter. It's not like a bullet hell shooter or anything like that. So maybe that's why, I don't know. It seems to be like big shooter fans nowadays like the shooters that throw like 10 trillion bullets at you on screen at one time. And this is not that. This is a storyline, slower paced shooter. The levels are slow, the enemies are slow, you have plenty of time to dodge and stuff like that. And so maybe that's why it's not like in the, the top of the rafters in the shooter Hall of Fame or anything, but very good shooter that probably doesn't get the credit it deserves for how fun it is and unique. Oh, I love this next game. The next game on the list is a special pick. This is a me pick right here. This is Hard Trilogy, made by Probe in 1996. And it also came out on the Sega Saturn, by the way. But anyways, if you like one game, what's better than just one game in your game? 3 games in your game. Hard Trilogy is basically 3, half games in one. It's got all 3 Die Hard movies in there. 1, 2, and 3 with a Vengeance, which is my favorite Die Hard movie of all time. And actually each game inside the game, oh my god, I'm going to say game like 1,000 times. But each game is a different type of game. For example, Die Hard 1, the game is actually a third-person sort of adventure game, like shooting adventure game, where you go through, Nakatomi Tower, you rescue hostages, you shoot the terrorists. Whereas Die Hard 2 is actually a light gun game. And one caveat to this is, the PlayStation version you can only use the controller with, which works fine for me. I never played a lot of gun games with the actual gun, but the Saturn version of this game actually works with the stunner, so you could actually use the light gun on the Saturn version, so that might be the superior version. I, however, believe it or not, I've never played the Saturn version. Maybe I will. I will for my channel someday, I'm sure. But it's a light gun game like Virtual Cop or, Time Crisis. And it's definitely, I think this is definitely the best game out of the 3. Although the third game, the Die Hard with a Vengeance game, is a lot like, it's a driving game, sort of like Crazy Taxi, where you're actually driving to bombs. Yes, doesn't make sense. Okay, you run over bombs and explode bombs before they explode? Yeah. But it's fun. It's like Crazy Taxi. You just have an arrow on, on the top of the screen. You need to race before the time runs out, hit the bomb, or, sometimes there's bombs in cars and you have to do a little sort of car combat in there. You get a really bad voiceover by a bad Samuel L. Jackson impersonator. Oh, it's glorious. But honestly, all 3 games are super fun. And one of the big unsung things about this game, I think, are the graphical effects, especially in the first Die Hard game. It uses transparency super well. You can break glass in it and stuff. And every time some of the building gets behind your character, it's sort of, it fades out so you can see through it. And that kind of effect was not super commonplace when the PlayStation 1 was out. My favorite game is definitely the gun game, Die Hard 2. It's so good. There's so much environmental damage in it. There's a lot of weapons. The only thing that I could knock the gun game, the second game, off a little bit is that the camera moves quite a lot. And so it's hard to aim in the game just because you'll be, trying to aim towards a terrorist and the camera will move and it'll move your target. And it's like your target's always sort of jumping around a little bit. So it makes it a little bit more difficult, but I really like the weapons in it, and especially the environmental destruction. A lot of gun games back then didn't have a lot of environmental destruction. They had some random thing you could shoot once in a while, but man, you can use bombs and grenades and rockets, and stuff is crashing everywhere. The ceilings are breaking, and it's pretty cool. I definitely like all 3 games in the Die Hard trilogy, and it's a super underrated game. But Die Hard trilogy is a monster. It's a monster of awesomeness. Alright, next game I've talked about before, it is called Ghost in the Shell. And it's on this list because I love Ghost in the Shell. But it was also super unique back in the day. It came out in 1997, and it was developed by Exact and Production IG. It came out in all territories, so US, Europe, and Japan. It was obviously based on the anime and manga of the same name, and the creator of the anime and manga, Masamune Shirow, actually did some work on the game, which is amazing. Amazing. He's one of my favorite artists of all time. I think back in the day when it came out, it was sort of a niche title, meaning it didn't sell all that well. There wasn't a lot of copy on store shelves or anything like that. I think it had that anime sort of stigma on it, you know what I mean? Sony America was focused on American games, American developers and stuff like that. And so, it didn't really get the advertising or, the fanfare that it needed when it first came out. And I love the game. The cinemas in the game were so good. They were anime cinemas made just for the game. The game had its own storyline. It didn't necessarily follow the manga or the anime at all, but it even had the voice actors, the same voice actors that did the original anime, the English dub of it, did the voices for the game. It's so amazing. The graphics are honestly pretty amazing in the game, but the big unique thing about it is the gameplay, because in the gameplay you actually control the tank, which is called a Fuchikoma. And now Fuchikoma, if you've read the comic, seen the anime, they can, walk on walls. They can walk on the ceiling. That is such a cool gameplay element that they brought into the game, because you can literally like cling to any wall. You can walk up walls, across the ceiling. There's a lot of cool bosses that you have to take advantage of that with, like bosses in tunnels where you have to go all the way around to dodge attacks and stuff like that. So it was super unique at the time. I don't even remember playing another game even since then that has sort of gameplay like this game. That's why I think it's way underrated. It's super unique. It follows, the heart of the manga and the anime so well. So well. And more people should be gushing about this game. It was amazing. Alright, the next game is an EA game called Future Cop L.A.P.D. It was released in 1998 by EA, Redwood Shores Studios.
X1 Alpha can go almost anywhere. When precise movement is required, use the action button.
Which is probably in California, judging by the name. Anyways, it came out in Europe and the US, not in Japan. It's actually a third-person shooter that started its development as a new strike game, like Jungle Strike and all that sort of stuff. It was a new strike game, but obviously they changed it. It's not a strike game anymore. But anyways, it's super unique. It takes place in the future Los Angeles in 2098. And man, has the neighborhood gone downhill. Not that LA could go downhill that much more, am I right? You have a super cool police mech machine thing that you go around and, shoot criminals with machine guns. Just like real life. It's got a pretty good story mode and big expansive environments. I think that's what makes it sort of pretty unique and pretty underrated, because again, this is a game that I never played. I actually never played this way back in the day, and I don't hear anyone talking about it very much. But when I played it, later on in my life, I was super impressed with the graphics and how fun it was, and just the presentation of everything. And it does have a super unique claim to fame if you've never played the game before. It's got a story mode, which obviously, you go through, do the story, shoot things. Got a lot of different weapons. There's a lot of cool areas. There's a lot of cool graphic effects. There's bosses and everything. Very, very, very fun. But it's got a precinct assault mode in it. And technically, from what I've heard, this might actually be the first MOBA ever released. Meaning this other mode is, a rudimentary style, almost like MOBA type game. And this is obviously way before League of Legends, people. And so it should definitely get more credit based on that, based on, the fun factor and the uniqueness of it. And it definitely should not be as unknown as it is. And the next game is easily also a me title. This is my childhood, part of my PlayStation childhood. And it is Guilty Gear. Yes, the first Guilty Gear was released on the PlayStation. 1998 by Arc System Works, came out in all territories, Europe, US, Japan. It was a 2D fighting game with a graphic style that I had never seen before. It was super edgy. It was bloody like Samurai Showdown. I love Samurai Showdown. It's one of my favorite fighting games back in the day. And it was pretty much the opposite of Street Fighter at the time. Street Fighter at the time was very, kind of squeaky clean, very polished. And obviously Street Fighter, at the time was amazing. The Capcom fighters were amazing, especially on the Sega Saturn, not the PlayStation. But that's what Guilty Gear did. Guilty Gear was a 2D fighter on the PlayStation that had graphics that almost rivaled the Saturn Street Fighters at the time, but it was so different. It had 10 super unique characters in it, and the animation was actually amazing for the PlayStation. It was actually way better than the PlayStation Capcom fighters at the time. And it was so unique. It was so edgy. There's like instant death moves. Yes, there's instant death moves where you do a move, no matter what your opponent's health is at, if you hit them with the move, they're dead. It was super fast paced. It was actually super hard, but it was one of those super unique fighting games that actually changed my perspective on fighting games a little bit. It really took fighting games to me into another level. And it was exclusive to the PlayStation. I definitely think this first Guilty Gear should get more credit. Obviously nowadays there's a bunch of newer Guilty Gears, and Guilty Gear actually is pretty popular, but this one was cutting edge when it came out, and I wish it got the credit where credit is due. And it's definitely underrated on the PlayStation, because when people talk about 2D PlayStation fighters, I don't hear it come up a lot, but it's easily one of the best ones, if not the best one. Animation wise, you know, fun factor wise, character design wise, edginess wise, Guilty Gear is a blast. Alright, two more games. The next super underrated PlayStation game I would like to talk about is called Silent Bomber. This is a game I never played when it first came out. I saw advertisements for it, maybe I saw reviews for it too in Game Fan magazine, my magazine of choice. But I wrote it off to like a Bomberman ripoff. I could swear, that's all I saw with it was, hey, they're trying to make a realistic, like gritty, like Bomberman. I don't want it. I don't want what you're selling. But man, was I wrong. It was released in 1999 and developed by CyberConnect. Yeah, you remember those guys, right? And it's definitely not what I expected, and it's such a good game that I don't hear anyone talking about necessarily. It's a story-based game. There's, you know, full-blown cinemas in there, pre-rendered cinemas. There's a lot of talking as you do the levels too. As you go through the levels, you have conversations, you know, with people, you know, talking in your ear, trying to get you to do things. The character development is pretty good. You're this guy that, you know, drops bombs, if you haven't caught on to that. And he feels guilty because he's used as a weapon, and he feels, you know, guilty about killing innocent people and stuff like that. So it's a very, you know, it's much more story based than it looks like on surface level. And it definitely doesn't play like Bomberman very much, meaning in Bomberman you drop a bomb and it explodes automatically. Well, in this one you actually have to detonate your bomb. So you go through these, you know, almost, you know, third person, almost top down adventures. There's mini bosses in the levels, there's bosses in the levels. You can drop bombs. You get different kinds of bombs. There's like a bomb that almost, you know, turns into a black hole and it sucks things in. In between levels, you can level up, you know, your health, your number of bombs and stuff like that, so you can drop more on the ground. But you have to detonate the bombs yourself, which leads to really interesting gameplay, because you need to sort of time your bombs with the enemy running over them. Like if you're battling a big tank boss or something, you obviously, you know, have to drop your bombs so they hit the tank. You can lock onto things and throw your bombs at them. It's a little clunky to control a little bit. Kind of hard to dodge too. You only have this like weird double jump dodge, so you can't just dodge whenever you need to dodge. It's kind of weird, but you know, it is what it is. It's very unique to go through it, see the different enemies, blow them up into tiny pieces, and experience the story too. And it's definitely very underrated for sure. Maybe it would have got a better fan base with maybe a better, you know, name, maybe better branding, because I'm sure a lot of people wrote it off right when it came out. But if you can, give it a try. It's pretty fun. And the last most underrated PlayStation game of all time that I want to talk about today is called Dino Crisis. Now hear me out, I know it's a Capcom game. Came out in 1999 by Capcom, the makers of Resident Evil. Resident Evil and Resident Evil 2, they just conquered the world of zombies. So obviously, what is next? What's the next thing after zombies to challenge yourself with? Dinosaurs, of course! So Dino Crisis plays a lot like the first Resident Evil games. However, it's super unique because the enemies are dinosaurs. They're not zombies, they're dinosaurs. So, you know, Resident Evil originally had the slow zombies in it, you know, intense, slow, anxiety building, you know, areas and stuff. Well, this one is a whole nother animal because the dinosaurs, they do not move slow. they come after you like nobody's business. And Dino Crisis was one of the Capcom's first games like this. Most of the games like this, obviously Resident Evil 1 and 2, had pre-rendered backgrounds. And this came out after Metal Gear Solid, so yes, it wasn't, the pioneer of sort of, the cinematic 3D environment, but it was that for Capcom. It's a fully 3D environment with no pre-rendered backgrounds, and that led to a lot of really, really cool like camera movement shots in the game. I thought they were very, very well the way they did them, because you could get different views. You could get, camera views of maybe, a dinosaur looking through a fence, following your character or something like that. You couldn't do that in the Resident Evil games with the pre-rendered backgrounds. And this was one of Capcom's first fully 3D games, and they did a phenomenal job on the graphics especially. They really leveled up a lot of the stuff from Resident Evil. It still had the tank controls and stuff, but there's definitely some unique things in it, like Regina, the main character, could actually get her weapon knocked out of her hand, and you had to go like pick it up off the ground, like in the middle of a dinosaur brawl. And like you don't have a life bar in the game, you actually judge how hurt she is by the blood she's leaving on the ground. And you can actually bleed in the game. You can bleed, and you'll die if you just let yourself bleed. But then there's items that help, stop the bleeding. They don't heal you, but they'll stop the bleeding so you won't bleed to death. So there's a lot of little unique sort of touches like that definitely made it stand out from Resident Evil. And I know this is an underrated games list, but Dino Crisis actually has a pretty big fan base, meaning there is a lot of people that want a new one. But that's why it's on this list. Dino Crisis is underrated by Capcom. They released the Dino Crisis 2, which, it was okay. And they released the Dino Crisis 3 actually on the Xbox, which, if I could create a time machine and go back and make it so that game didn't exist, I would probably do that. I would probably go back first and fix my major bad life decisions, but Dino Crisis 3 Erasure would be high on that list too. But we're talking about two games on the PlayStation 1. PlayStation 1. It was ported to the Dreamcast eventually, but Dino Crisis was a super unique take on the survival horror genre that Capcom themselves started, and it's just been completely forgotten. That's why I say it's underrated. If it had a bigger fan base, maybe Capcom would listen, but we need a new Dino Crisis. Like, look at the modern day graphics we have nowadays. Imagine a modern day Dino Crisis. Come on. So underrated by Capcom themselves, and maybe the fan base too. Maybe it does need a few more fans. I would give it a try if you can and you never played it. And keep letting Capcom know how underrated this classic is.
That's disgusting.
This guy's been eviscerated. Something tore his intestines straight out.
Look at those tooth marks. It had to be some sort of animal.
Alright, that's my list. Most underrated PlayStation 1 games. Do you agree? Disagree? I don't know. Let's talk below. Doesn't matter. Thanks for tuning in, guys, gals, non-binary pals. Thanks for the support. Please do the subscribe and comment thing. And make sure you check out the store, shop.enemyzero.com, and the other channel, Figurama by enemyzero, down below. I appreciate you, I love you, and thank you for watching.